Hi, everybody. It's Chuck Gilmore with Power to Sing Live, number 121. Welcome. Today we're going to talk about vocal cords and what they do as we sing higher. Do they zip up? And I had that question asked today. We're going to talk about that. How's everybody doing today? It's still winter here in this grand state of Utah. It's snowing a lot in our mountains. Fortunately, raining down in the valley, so I don't have to scrape the snow. But I know the Midwest and the East are getting, in the United States at least, are getting an Arctic blast of air this week that's really causing a lot of bitter cold in what's supposed to be starting to be spring, right? How's everybody doing today? Want to say hi, Lisa. Nice to have you here today. Great to see you. She's got to go to work, school bus driver, catch today's session on replay. Yeah. So very nice to say hi and good luck on transporting children. CSI, hi. Nice to have you here. Nuno, great to have you here. Okay. I want to make sure that everybody can hear and see me, so if you can't, let me know, and if you can take a second and say, yeah, everything's good. All right, so here's the question. So we're going to talk about whether or not the vocal cords zip up as we go higher. So whether they're zipping up or unzipping or not. We'll talk about that. Meanwhile, let me ask you this. Have you ever heard that vocal cords are like a piano string, that the higher the notes go, the shorter, just like a piano, as the piano, as the notes, the pitches get higher, the strings get shorter and shorter and shorter. Doesn't that make sense? Have you ever heard that before? Yes or no? Let me know in the comment section below. I heard that for years. In fact, it makes a lot of sense, right? So let me know if you've ever heard that before, yes or no. The vocal cords are like piano strings. As you sing higher, they get shorter and shorter and shorter. So the pitch can go higher and higher. Hey, Bestie, nice to have you here. I can watch it later. Yep, it's 12 a.m. there. So, well, thanks for just checking in with me. And we'll catch you. It'll be in here after the broadcast is over. We'll put it here. Hey, Joe. Nice to have you with us today. Great to see you. Thanks, CSI. Hey, George. How's it going out there in Paradise, California? CSI said, I've never heard that about a piano, but as a guitar, yes. Yeah, same thing on the guitar string. Tighten it up, and so the string gets shorter and shorter, and the pitch gets higher and higher. So we're going to talk more about that today. So I appreciate all of you who've joined and have said hi and goodbye. Got to go to bed. It's like midnight, or got to go to work. And thank you. Thanks for checking in. And this broadcast will be ready for you when you're awake and you get off, or when you get off work. Okay, so what about this concept of, where did this come from in the first place? This idea of the vocal cords like getting shorter and shorter like a piano string, or like zipping and unzipping. We're going to talk a bit about that. Connection is buffering a little bit. George is looking okay from this side, so you may want to refresh or something. Akshay, hi. Nice to have you here. Nuno says, a couple days ago I was singing an Ariana Grande song and sang an F6. F5, F6. Woo! Wow. How do I know if it was falsetto or like whistle? No, it was not intentional. Okay. So it may be did it like kind of break into a falsetto? My guess is if it kind of like was unintentional, it kind of like just suddenly flipped up into that upper range, into a whistle-like note, it probably was a falsetto. And I can't really tell you what the difference is between falsetto and whistle, except I think the similarities are that they are both rather disconnected tone. But wow, that's something. Okay, so let's kind of let's get down to, first of all, here's a disclaimer. I would not consider myself an expert in in the um, in the realm of vocal cords themselves. I have a general knowledge of it, and but I'm not a scientist, and nor am I a trained vocalist. And admittedly, I need to continually press forward and gaining more understanding and knowledge about the chord structure. Um, yeah, Akshay, that's it says I saw your YouTube video about the vocal cords 3 days ago. It's got millions and millions of views, and it's been very helpful for people all over the world. Um, but let me begin by giving the answer to the question today. And that question is, do the vocal cords zip? Do they zip? And what does that mean? First of all, imagine a zipper, okay? And when you start to zip up, the zipper zips up. That's the concept that is being asked today. I had this question in a YouTube comment and wanted to know, do the vocal cords zip up, as you start to sing higher? Do they go like a zipper, just kind of like come together, and so that they're vibrating, and a little bit less and less is vibrating, and a little bit less and less? And that makes sense, doesn't it? Because if this part down here is staying, it stops vibrating, and the chords are essentially just getting a little bit shorter. So they start out this long, and now the vibrating element is getting smaller and smaller. It almost feels that way inside our bodies. We kind of like get this sensation of something getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so, to a large extent, many of us as singers kind of like, it feels kind of like that too. Bestie says, by the way, you asked me to send my voice again, so I did, but not from the voice app, but from the mail. I will check it out. I just haven't gotten to that email yet. Okay. Random Stuff. Hi, Random Stuff. Nice to have you here. Hello there. I love all your videos. It's really helped me through my journey. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today. Okay, so let me begin by saying the vocal cords do not zip. They do not zip. But we're going to explore that a little bit more. Where did that concept come from? And I think and why? Why did that concept persist for such a long time? One reason is because we didn't have the technology to put a scope either through the nose or down the throat and get a good look at what the vocal cords were doing. And even when we did see the vocal cords at first, when we were looking at them, we're only able to look at the top. So in this example, the top would be like this. So the camera comes down, and now it's looking at the vocal cords, right? So if they're laying here like this horizontally, and then you look at it on a screen, and they look like they're up and down. So even when we could see the vocal cords with the camera, we still couldn't see down here. We couldn't see underneath the vocal cords subglottally, and we couldn't, really see very well what's going on in between the vocal cords as they're functioning and working. And so that was a technological limitation. And so we really couldn't So much of the teaching of the vocal cords themselves, or better known or often known as vocal folds, was just, they could see them, but they couldn't see them closely. And as technology has improved, of course, our knowledge has grown, and we've started to realize that the working theories behind the vocal folds themselves, the vocal cords, has been replaced by more accurate scientific observation and data and study. So with the new technology that has come about in the last 10 to 15 years, I suppose, maybe 20 years, people have come to understand that no, that they're not actually zipping up like we one time thought. They're not actually doing that because we can't observe it. We don't see it in action. Of course, the other difficulty is, even if you can see them, when people are singing, you can even watch them. It's still probably a little bit different. I've had my vocal cords scoped. Have you ever had your cords scoped? Let me know in the comments. Yes, I've had them scoped. Let me know. I'd be curious. It's not as easy to vocalize with something down your nose and down your throat. There's a little bit of, for me, a little bit of a difference, and than just being my regular voice, right? So even then, we can't really see what's really functioning in a high performance singer on all the pitches, from the top, in between, and from down below, and what's going on around, and what's happening also with, it's pretty hard to get data on a system like that that's got a lot of little inputs. There's surrounding muscles and surrounding structures that are involved, and it's pretty hard to really get clear on it. But pretty much what's for certain is that there's not this actual zipping in this fashion, like just going like this. So if it were like this, and you were looking at my vocal cords coming on right here, it's harder to see, but it would be kind of like this, the shorter. They were getting shorter and shorter in their vibrating length. Just at first they're this long, and then it's this long, and then it's this long, and then finally just a little tiny area of the vocal cord as it zips up is vibrating. That's that appears to not be the case in that we've that's been discovered through the science of that's been provided through better technology. So we're going to talk a little bit more, try and clarify a little bit more of exactly what is happening. So Jorge, hi, how you doing? Great to have you here today. Okay, so here's a book that was published in 1959, and in many cases it's a wonderful book. I have loved reading this book. I've gone through it. I've underlined it. I've made notes in the side of the, it's almost page by page. Has been pretty amazing. It's by a person named E. Herbert Chesery, and he was a really world famous teacher of voice. Was connected very much with the old school Italian singers, and so he's had a big influence on many of the vocal theories, even that we use today. And from my understanding, this book was used for years and years by a major university in Southern California in their vocal department. It was the Bible for many years, And it was published in 1951, so you can imagine there wasn't the technology, that we have today. The smallest television screen was large, and we're talking about a little tiny camera now that can go down, that we have today, that go down and look closely at vocal cords. We just didn't have that then. Well, let me just share with you a couple things that he says here, and somehow it's a little cryptic, so I'll just kind of talk about this, what he says about what's going on with the vocal cords. He's talking about zipping here. And he's talking about how, let's take a vocal cord and divide it into 64ths, 1/64th. And then he talks about how, with this premise in view, let us now accompany our soprano. He's talking about soprano singer, note by note, up the chromatic scale. So he's saying at the B flat, or at the B natural, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, the first line, her chords will shorten by 6 gradations of 1/64th of an inch each. A total, therefore, of 6/64ths. So with every half step, he was saying they're starting to shorten. 1/64th, 2, 3, or 6/64ths. That was his theory of how the vocal chords were responding to going up in pitch. And then there's a little asterisk. And at the bottom of the page, here's what he says. The chord shortening process is achieved by what we could well call a forward creeping muscular grip, moving pincer-like horizontally along the adducted chords with a braking process. A braking process. And he's got that in parentheses. A braking process. Not a breaking apart, but like a stopping process, progressively stilling or stopping the portion after portion of the vibrant chords. So as you go further and further up the pitch, as you ascend further and further up, that the more and more vocal cord is not vibrating anymore. For an ascending interval, the forward-moving grip adjusts itself accordingly. On a descending scale or interval, a reversing or releasing action takes place. In other words, it's unzipping in the reverse. It reminds one of the action of a zip fastener. Opening and closing, or closing and opening. And so, the leading theorist and actual vocal teacher and who had scientific connections to the industry and so forth, this is what he was teaching, that the chords actually zipped up. And so many have, in the early days, adopted this approach. Because in a way, it kind of feels that way as you sing higher. You can tell, if I go up the scale, it just sounds like there's less vibrating. Imagine going up the piano, and the piano strings are getting shorter and shorter. It just kind of feels that way. But it's not the case. It's not the case. Let me take a couple. George has never had his chords scoped. Matthew Burnett. Hi, Matthew. Nice to have you here today, Matthew. Chuck, have you ever heard of John McCormick? As he was an Irish tenor. My mother bought me a record of his 8 years, and the way he sang was very different. Found out that in his training, his teacher taught him to use the messa voce, which means to sing with half or less than half of the volume. Look him up sometime, you'll be amazed. Thanks, Matthew. George says, are there any present authors that talk about the voice? Yes. Titsa. T-I-T-S-A. Oh gosh, you would ask me, George. Um, I'll find it for you. I think the name is. He pronounces it like pizza, but I think he spells it like Titza, something like that. Voice. Let me just see if I can find it really quickly for us here. Um, yeah. Um, okay. So his name is his full name here. Let me get it. Ingo R. Titze, Titze, is a voice scientist and the executive director of the National Center for Voice and Speech and an adjunct professor of the Department of Otolaryngology, a head and neck surgery, and he happens to be now in my hometown here, the state of Utah, in Salt Lake City, and he also teaches the Summer Vocology Institute. So I think he's known worldwide, internationally, as one of the most foremost teachers and scientists of the voice and the function of the voice. I've had a chance to meet him. His daughter actually was the one that scoped my vocal cords, and she's a vocalogist here in the state of Utah. So these scientists who are studying the voice, and he's also a singer, just a gentleman of a man, these scientists are uncovering the real functions, of how the voice is working. So we know that they don't literally zip up like that. And here's the other issue. You may be interested to know, and I'm sure many of you do know this if you've watched my video on vocal cords. It's called Singing Basics, How Do Vocal Cords Work? You want to check that out. It's my #1 viewed video, and it's got, like, I don't know, 9 million views or something. Or 10 or 11, I can't remember. Anyway, the vocal cords actually lengthen. It's the reverse of the piano. The vocal cords are elongating as the pitch goes higher. And we also know that the vocal cords get more tense. They're tensioning as the pitch ascends. And in reverse, there's less tension. The tension decreases inside the chord structure as you descend into lower pitches, and the vocal cords get shorter and shorter as you descend the scale. So it's the opposite of what seems kind of intuitive, doesn't it? All right, so Torrentino.com. Hi, Torrentino.com. Nice to have you here. He says, "Hi Chuck, it's true that I can find mixed voice. Is it true that I can find mixed voice by adding twang to my head voice?" Sure, you can. You can add twang to your head voice. It's not going to be ideal, and there's going to be added tension, and it's going to sound manufactured and unnatural. But you can find mix that way. No. Hi, Chuck. The vocal folds are longer and thinner at a high pitch and shorter and thicker on the low notes. Right on. Again, probably we should, that's a good idea. I could put my link in here too, just to illustrate the point that Null made, is that the chord structure actually gets longer as you ascend and shorter as you descend. And never thought about actually loading a link to this video, but let's see here. I'm going to open it up on my, I've got to be careful not to, okay, so here we go. How vocal cords work. And if you don't like music, there's one that has no music in it. Let me see here. Okay. So yeah, I'll put this in there. It's got actually 11 million views. Can you believe that? 11 million views. And so where are we here? Let me get back to. Let me just put this into the. Yeah, you guys might enjoy seeing this. The vocal cords actually with a singer singing, and so a piano string is shorter at high notes and longer on the low notes. Did I get that in reverse? Thank you. I must have said it backwards. Yeah, as the pitch goes higher, the piano strings get shorter and shorter and shorter, and then down below on the lowest notes, they're real long, big, almost like spring-like strings, and it's the opposite of that for the vocal folds. The vocal folds get longer as you go higher, and there's more tension as you go higher. Okay, so so what happens then when the vocal cords go higher? Let's talk about that. In addition to the vocal cords getting longer and more tense, there's more tension in the chord structure as you ascend up the scale. There's also some of the muscles in the vocal cords themselves become more dominant or less dominant as you are in your chest voice, as you begin going higher through the bridge of the voice, and as you go into your head voice. Now, these muscles in the vocal folds that are more dominant, the muscle that's more dominant in the vocal fold when you're in your chest voice is called the thyroid arytenoid, the TA, the thyroid arytenoid. And its role is to kind of beef up the chord structure so that the vocal, so the condition or the quality of your adduction as you bring these chords together is stronger. And so it's sometimes referred to as a chest dominant, as that muscle being more chest dominant when you're in your chest voice. I don't know that that's precisely 100% accurate, but as you begin to ascend, it still remains active. If it gives out, if that muscle gives out, it's gone. Now I'm in falsetto. It's not present in falsetto. But if it stays with it, if it doesn't give out, it still has that. It still has some presence there. There's still participation of the thyroid arytenoid, the TA, sometimes it's called, although there's another muscle, the same name, but the thyroid arytenoid, and it's still participating, but it's becoming less dominant as you go up the pitch. On the way up, then there's another muscle that assumes more dominance as you go into your head voice, and that's called the cricothyroid, or sometimes called the CT muscle. The cricothyroid is a tensing, helps tension or tense the thyroid cartilage, and it helps tilt the larynx a little bit, and helps you as you need increased tension as the pitch goes up. So as your pitch ascends and you're going into your head voice, then the CT, the cricothyroid, becomes more dominant. But that's not to the exclusion of everything else, unless I break into falsetto. But so that the TA is still there, if I'm in head voice, but the CT is assuming more a dominant role now, as I understand how things work. Again, I'm not a scientist, but that's my understanding of what happens in the vocal folds. Okay, or in the vocal cords. So let me just take a comment here, a question from No. Why does reinforced falsetto, and I don't know the answer to this question because I don't know the definition of reinforced falsetto. I don't have a clear concept of that, No. So I don't want to even venture any further because I'm only guessing. I don't know exactly what is meant by reinforced falsetto. Sorry. Now, let's talk about one other aspect here of, so when people have talked about the vocal cords zipping up, like this, what actually may be the case, or maybe very similar to that, is the vocal cords in this kind of because this is what's happening in the chord structure, right? When it's in slow motion, the vocal cords are doing this kind of action, and it's creating the sound wave and so forth superiorly, and sending out the vibrations and the resonance. There may be some kind of, as the pitch ascends, a little bit more this way, where there's less full body of chord structure, so that as the pitch ascends, there is somewhat an elimination. So they're getting longer, right? They're getting more tense as they're pulled longer, and also so they're getting less deep. So they have to get less deep if they're pulled longer. Like, think of the thickness of a rubber band. It's thick here, but if they start getting stretched, then now it's not as the cord, or the rubber band's not as deep, or the chords also maybe aren't quite as deep, and so there may be some kind of like thinning process this way, where you could say, in a matter of speaking, that they're zipping, but in a different plane. So I don't know that it's, and maybe that's what we feel as we go higher. We feel like we feel that tensioning and this less depth because it's being thinned out a little bit by that stretch. So that's the high C, and that's kind of an illustration of messa voce, but so there may be, and again, I'm not being scientific about this, but as far as how I feel it, I think I'm still feeling some kind of reduction of, only maybe the zipping is in this this plane instead of this plane. So, maybe Mr. Cesare isn't up in the night after all. Well, he's actually deceased, but you know what I mean. Oftentimes, for me, the scientific terminology doesn't mean a lot, but the sensory feeling that I get in my voice, that means a lot to me. So I like the idea of being able to at least relate something to my nervous system and my brain and so forth. This feedback that you get when you sing, to kind of know that there is something definitely adjusting in your vocal cords. And on in a simplified fashion, down low, ah, the thyroid arytenoid muscle is more dominant, and as I go higher, it's still participating, but the cricothyroid is taking more and more of the load, and the thyroid arytenoid is reducing its participation. It's not eliminating it. They're both still going at the same time, but one becomes more dominant. Cricothyroid goes more dominant, and the thyroid arytenoid becomes less dominant as you go up. And you can hear something changing, right? I don't know the answer, but I doubt there's much cricothyroid going on down here. Okay, so let me take a couple more comments, and that's kind of the basic thing I wanted to relate to you today. Is there's strictly speaking, in the old concept, there's not so much of this zipping process this way, but perhaps there may be some truth to this in this plane. Certainly, it feels there's something that definitely feels that way as you're singing. Okay. No. Reinforced falsetto is a Bon Jovi scream or a Wicked Witch cackle. Oh, like a nay, nay, nay. Yeah, so for me, falsetto is when the if I want to get really strict about this, thinking about falsetto would be the thyroid arytenoid is no longer engaged. So that's falsetto. So I've never tried to reinforce falsetto with nay, 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 nay. I guess that sounds like a witch cackle, but it's still disconnected tone. Nay, 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 nay. Now if I connect it, nay, 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 nay. That's head voice. It's a witchy kind of a high larynx head voice. The upper part's head voice, at least. So, and some of it's a little, yeah, that would be a mix right here. Nay, nay, nay. That's a high larynx mix. So, it's hard for me to give a real good explanation or definition, to your question. I'm just, because our terminologies are different. Neng, NG, NNN, ABD, M are also examples of reinforced falsetto. Huh, okay. Well, I define falsetto so differently that it just doesn't work with my nomenclature. I'd have to put it in a different context. Sorry, I can't be more exact on that. But it's kind of like we're speaking two languages. Okay, so any questions about what's going on with the vocal cords as you go higher? We don't zip up, at least not in this longitudinal horizontal plane. There may be something to it as we ascend in pitch, whereas there's not full depth of chord because we're getting pulled. There's more tension, you see, and so the chords are thinning out. So maybe these aren't participating in this lower section here. So it's getting thinner and tighter. So perhaps there is some kind of motion or direction that way. Less vibrating element down here because we're getting pulled tighter and tighter. So maybe Cesare had the right idea. It's just in a different plane, a different instead of the horizontal, it may be occurring in the inferior to superior plane. There's a name for that. I'm not sure what it is. So the name of that plane. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions or no other nothing else you would like to talk about, I hope this has been helpful. Shed a little bit of light on some of the maybe perhaps misunderstanding that's been out there. It is maybe not even that big of a misunderstanding. It's just a different way to look at it. That the reduction of the vibrating part of the vocal cord is just looking at it in a different fashion. Now that science has been able to verify that no, they're not really zipping up like this per se, but perhaps like this because of the tension being pulled and there's not as much depth in the chord structure and so forth as we ascend in pitch. But definitely there are muscles that are dominant. The muscle, the thyroid arytenoid, the TA is more dominant in the chest, and as it ascends higher, it has less of a role. And then the cricothyroid is assuming a greater role in the production of the tone, and so it's helpful to get an understanding of those things. Thanks everybody, and it's great to be with you today. I hope you have a great week. This is Chuck Gilmore with Power to Sing live number 121, and I hope this has been helpful to you. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.